let's start with a question. Yechezkel Cohen lives in Yerushalayim, right? Expecting the first baby. The time comes, they jump into the cab, rush to Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. They walk into the lift, up to the 9th floor. That's where the Chadar Lida, that's where the birthing rooms are in Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Yerushalayim. A couple of hours later, the midwife says, Mazel Tov, it's a boy. Yechezkel's very excited, but he's also very aware of halacha. It's a boy. What day is the baby born on? The sun is just setting. It's just beginning to get dark. Right? It was a Monday. Is it Monday? It's Monday afternoon. Is it Monday still? Or is it already Tuesday night? Right? He's on the 9th floor Shaarei Tzedek, so there are no buildings blocking his view. He can look straight out the window. And as the one midwife says it's a boy, he looks out the window and he can just see the sun setting beneath the horizon. So he's very excited. So he knows it's a Monday baby. Why is that so important? What day the baby is born? Besides, of course, to know when his birthday is going to be. That's very important. We get the birthday on the right day. The bris is on the 8th day. Right? The bris is on the 8th day. What does that mean? The day in Judaism starts at the night, continues into the day. So the baby has to be before the end of the day, before the night started, to be called to be born on the Monday. If it's considered to be born on Monday, then the 8th day will be the following Monday. If our Yechezkel, right? If his name is Yechezkel got it wrong, and really he was born on Monday night, then halachically that's called Tuesday birth, and the bris will be on Tuesday. Okay, just for those who walked in, we're talking about our Yechezkel Cohen is not a real character. If you know someone of that name, it's not him. Who lives in Yerushalayim. He's just rushed to the Shaarei Tzedek Hospital for the birth of his baby boy. And as the head came out, the head is the important part. As the head came out, and the midwife said, "Congratulations," he looks and he sees the sun just setting beneath the horizon. So he's convinced that the baby was born before sunset, right? Shkia Sachamo. We talked about that last time, Shkia Sachamo, sunset. We mentioned last time that sunset is slightly different from Shkia. Sunset, as defined in the secular sources, is when the sun is halfway. The middle of the sun is leveled on the horizon. Whereas, halachically, as long as even a little part of the sun is above the horizon, it's still daytime. Sunset is only when the entire sun has disappeared. So he knows that, Yechezkel knows that, he's very keen. And he knows that even though he's seen most of the sun has gone below the horizon, he can still see the top part of the sun. So it's a Monday birth. He calls up, obviously he waits for the news to sink in, calls up his parents. Then later that evening, when he's a bit more relaxed, he calls up the moyal already. He wants to chap the moyal that he wants for the following Monday. He tells him the whole story. He's going to have a bris on Monday. And the moyal says, no, it's going to be a bris on Tuesday. Huh? Tuesday? But I saw the sun. I saw it with my own eyes. I was at the 9th floor Shaarei Tzedek. I could see from the window.
Because he's on that.
Very good. So the important piece of information for our detectives out there, right, was information I threw in that the birthing ward in Shaarei Tzedek is on the 9th floor. It's on the 9th floor, right? If the person on the 9th floor can just see the top of the sun disappearing beneath the horizon, then someone on the ground floor wouldn't be able to see the sun, right? This is an important addition for those who missed the story, but you're here for the principle. An important addition to what we saw last week, 2 weeks ago I think it was, which is that sunset, and for that matter, any of the other sunrise, any of the other halachic times of the day, are determined by someone standing on the ground, not someone standing on the ninth floor. Right? So, if the person on the ninth floor can still see the sun, and he sees the top part of the sun, it hasn't yet fully set, but the person on the ground floor can't see the sun anymore, it's already disappeared, then it's already nighttime. It's ready to nighttime because it's determined by the ground floor.
What happens if you're in a hilly city and you're on a hill?
Right.
As opposed to in a valley?
Right.
You're still on the ground.
Good question. This is the point we touched on last time. We talked about this last time. I mentioned the extreme case of if you were to dig a pit and stand in the pit, right? You would see the sun appear at 11:55 and it would disappear at 12:05, right? So we're not going to say the sunrise for you is at 11:55 and sunset is at 12:05, right? So we mentioned last time that the definition as defined by Rabbi Eliezer, he was a Spanish Rishon, the 13th century, and it's brought down by the Mishnah Berurah, the main halachic posek, lived into the beginning of the 20th century, is that it has to be the sun is visible at the tops of the mountains. So we explained different opinions on what that exactly means, but just to summarize the conclusion was that obviously we take away any local objects which hide the view of the person involved. So if he's inside a pit, we're not going to take into account the walls of the pit. Right? If he's standing just behind a hill, we're going to obviously imagine the hill's not there. So we will when we calculate whether there's sunrise or sunset, we will calculate it as if there are no obstructions. But that's different to the question we're dealing with now, right? So we will remove obstructions. Any obstructions we will imagine are not there. If we're calculating it with astronomical calculations, we won't take into account the local terrain. But this is a different point. Here we're talking about where he's not on the ground, but he's all the way up there in the air. Mm-hmm. Now that's irrelevant how high you are above the ground. The fact that you are at a vantage point of a high building is not going to change the halachic times of the day. It's not going to change when sunrise or sunset is. Okay? Now obviously this question doesn't come up in this form that often, right? Not that many people have had births on the ninth floor, noticed the sun just setting. But obviously, if anyone can imagine where I'm leading on to, this is very, very relevant nowadays. With regard to?
Friday night bursts.
With regard to? A plane.
What's?
A plane. You're up in the sky in a plane. Right? Obviously, we don't have to have a bath on the plane. We can make it into a halachic shayla which is relevant daily. The person wants to daven, wants to pray shachris, mincha, ma'ariv.
Sometimes you go in and out of it. You go to night day.
Exactly. So he's in the plane and he's on a long flight, right? And he sees the sun, and the sun just begins to rise. He can see it coming up. He's marveling at the sun rising, right? And then he looks around him, and his neighbor, very religious Jew, the person sitting next to him, not his neighbor where he lives, his neighbor on the flight, right? His person sitting next to him in the seat next to him is instead of marveling the beautiful sunrise, has already got his talis tefillin on, and he's just starting Shemona Esrei. He's just starting to daven Shemona Esrei. Because it's sunrise. The best time to daven Shemona Esrei is at sunrise, which is called Vosikin. To daven at Netzacham, to daven at sunrise is the best time to daven. So instead of marveling, he's decided to daven. Was that the correct thing to do or not? Was it the correct thing to do? Who's doing the correct thing? Our friend who's marveling the sunrise, or the person next to him who's already davening shachris and davening Shemona Esrei exactly at sunrise, which is the ideal time for Shemona Esrei? Who's got it right?
They both got it right. Just it depends from where they came from a same place, but still, if someone
is the sun visible on the ground?
Oh, very good.
They are.
Very good. He's very high up in the sky. He's in a plane. He's in an aeroplane. People beneath him, they won't see the sun. right? He's flying directly above Lakewood, let's say. He's directly above Lakewood, right? All the people in Lakewood are still sleeping. It's pitch black down in Lakewood. Well, maybe there's a bit of light on the horizon, but there's definitely no sun. There's no visible sun, right? The whole kilometre beneath him. They can't see the sun. So it's not sunrise yet. It's not Netzachamo. It would have been better to have waited a little longer until he's sure that it's sunrise beneath him, which is not so easy to calculate. It's not so easy to calculate, and therefore, someone who's travelling on a plane, and he's going to have this problem of Shachris, Mincha, Ma'av, one of the tefillas on the plane, he has to pray one of the prayers on the plane. The best thing to do is to be aware of this in advance, and to calculate where approximately he thinks he's going to be at the time of the various prayers, and to work out, nowadays it's very easy, there are various different apps, internet websites where it's possible to find the correct time, halakhic times of davening. So he should work out, assuming his plane's not going to be delayed. If his plane's delayed, he's going to have to, while he's waiting for the to recalculate.
He doesn't have to do that either, because on the plane they have the map that shows where the plane is above.
So if he knows exactly where he's above,
he could use his app.
So he can use it on the plane. Okay. So while he's on the plane, he can calculate it. He can see where he's above. He puts it into myzmanim.com or something else. What time is sunrise at that particular place? And then he can work out exactly when to daven. Okay. Okay. Let's move on now. That's an important point when calculating sunrise and sunset. Just to summarize, is that sunrise and sunset are calculated according to the person at ground level. Someone on a tall building, someone up in a plane, has to calculate when sunrise or sunset is on the ground beneath him. Okay?
Does it work by the moon also? The moon, like...
Does it work by the moon? What do you mean?
Is it possible to calculate this from the moon? I mean, in theory?
No. The moon is not relevant when it comes to...
No, if somebody's on the moon, I'm saying.
Someone's on the moon.
Is it
someone is on the
possible to calculate that?
Right, the question is someone is on the moon, he's not above any particular level of any particular...
When you're in a plane,
Right.
you're looking down at your point. So
Right.
if you're on the moon, you're seeing a point at any given
Right.
time.
Right.
If you shoot something, eventually you're going to hit a point.
Yeah, the poskim do talk about what to do on the moon. The question actually came up.
that point is
it was
moving.
actually asked halachically.
Well, the plane is also moving. I mean, we're always moving.
No, but the moon and the earth are moving.
Right, the same thing with the plane, though.
If you fired at a point, that point would disappear.
Same thing with the plane. It will change. It's just a matter of how much it will change. Because the plane is also moving. On some level. I mean, it's a matter of magnitude.
Right.
But like, theoretically.
It's true, it is above a certain area. The question is not dealt with in detail in the poskim for obvious reasons. The question was asked. It was asked once when Ilan Ramon, the Israeli astronaut, went up to space. He did ask a number, even though he wasn't religious. Right, he wasn't religious. He decided to remember his heritage when it came to going up to space, and he did ask some halachic, some shyness, some halachic questions before he went up. He took with a, as you mentioned, he took with a thing. Took with a Sefer Torah. And he did ask a question about davening time, even, right? And they asked the question to Rabbi Eliezer.
Okay.
And the question is not going to help you very much. His answer was, it's not the place for a Jew to be on the moon. His answer was, he didn't give an answer of when to daven. He said there's certain places where. Why did he give that answer? Because there's no clear answer to the question. That's not
It's not.
There's no clear answer to the
Plus,
question.
finding a minion is really tough.
Finding a minion is tough, yeah.
Right, it only pertains to the realm of life, which is applicable to us.
Right.
So if it's not...
People really were.
Right. Okay. Right. Okay. Let's move on to a different aspect of. We're continuing with the halachic times of the day. Let's move on now to a different point. Okay. Let's talk now about halachic time. Let's talk a little bit about mincha. We mentioned a little bit about shachris and kriyas shema last week. We can come back to it, but mincha we didn't touch on at all. When should mincha the afternoon prayers? When should they be? When does one pray mincha?
Half an hour.
Oh, very good. So there's some names that we have to familiarize ourselves with. First of all, there's mincha gedola. Mincha gedola, the greater mincha, is the first time that we have to be introduced to. Mincha gedola was the earliest time that the korban tomid was the daily korban was brought a daily sacrifice in the temple was brought twice a day, in the morning and the afternoon. The afternoon sacrifice had to be brought during the afternoon. The earliest time it could be brought was the time called mincha gedola. That was the earliest time. Mincha, the afternoon prayers, are to replace the afternoon sacrifice. So the time of mincha mirrors the time of the sacrifice, of the korban tomid shel bein ha'abayim, the afternoon sacrifice. The earliest time it could be brought was a time called mincha gedola. When is mincha gedola? Mincha gedola is half an hour after chatzos, midday. Half an hour after midday is the time of mincha gedola. That's the earliest time one can have mincha. Before calculating it, bear in mind that it's not clear that this half hour is really half an hour. Why? Because if you recall something we mentioned just at the very end last week, I keep on saying last week, it was the last time we met, but it wasn't last week. We mentioned at the very end, so I'll go through it again, is that there's something called seasonal hours, sho'is maniyos. Now when we talk about hours, when discussing halachic times of the day, we talk about these seasonal hours. A seasonal hour is defined as 1/12 of the current day. So if we have a day that starts at 6 o'clock and ends at 6 o'clock, which may happen around the time of the equinox, either in March or in September, then we have a 12-hour day, and every hour is a 60-minute hour, just like on the clock. In which case, mincha, if the chatzos is at 12 o'clock, if we start at 6 and end at 6, the midday is going to be at 12. Half an hour is half of it's just going to be a regular 60-minute hour. 12:30 is going to be the time of mincha gedola. If, however, it's the middle of the summer and we're not too far away from the equator, let's assume that sunrise, the day starts at 7 o'clock in the morning. 5 o'clock in the morning. And the sun sets at 7 o'clock in the evening. We have a slightly longer day. The day is now 14 hours long. If we take these 14 hours and divide it into 12 equal parts, we'll get a seasonal hour. We'll find that each seasonal hour is actually 70 minutes. So therefore, mincha, again, midday comes out, with my example, it comes out, it won't always come out at 12 o'clock midday. Right? My example of sunrise being at 5 and sunset at 7, it comes out that the midday is at 12. Of course, it won't always come out that way. In this case, mincha gedola will be at what time?
It'll be 12:30. 12:30.
You just missed the last thing we said. Somebody didn't miss it? When's mincha gedola going to be?
What's morning 5?
Sorry?
What's morning 5?
5.
Morning was at 5. Sunrise was at 5. Sunset was at 7. 14-hour day. 14-hour day. If we divide 14 by 12, we get 70 minutes. Each seasonal hour is 70 minutes. Right? If we have 12 70 minutes sections, we'll fill the day.
So 12:35.
It's 12:35. Very good. Half an hour is going to be half of 70, which is 35. So mincha gedola will be at 12:35. Right? The opposite in the winter. We'll talk about the winter in a second. 12:35. If we go, before we talk about the winter, let's go further north. If we go further north, we always use Denmark as an example as further north. Denmark, Canada, we may find that it will be 12:40 or perhaps even 12:45 before we can have mincha, because the seasonal hours there are going to be even longer. The day starts earlier, the day ends later, and we can have a seasonal hour which is much longer than a 60-minute hour. Could be even be 75, 80 minutes. Okay. Let's move on to the opposite case of the winter.
Shorter.
The opposite case. The opposite case of the winter, it would come out, let's say we had the opposite way round. This time sunrise is at 7 o'clock and sunset is at 5 o'clock. We have a 10-hour day. 10-hour day, that means we're going to have 600 minutes. Divided by 12, we're going to have 50-minute hours. Each hour is 15 minutes. Midday again, with my example, it's come out again. The midday is at 12. Again, it's not always going to be 12 o'clock. So, if we take half of seasonal hour, when's Mincha Gedola going to be? When's the earliest time he can pray the afternoon prayers? 12:25. It should come out like that. However, there are poskim that say that it doesn't work both ways. The poskim that say that it's never less than half an hour. It's never less than half an hour, possibly because they're unsure of whether the half an hour is a half a seasonal hour or half a clock hour, perhaps, and therefore they say it's not less than
less than 30 minutes.
Less than 30
30 minutes.
That's a better way of saying it. Yes. Never less than 30 minutes.
Civil hours are 30 minutes hours for anything.
Sorry, do Chazal
use civil 30 minutes hour for any 30 minutes?
That's a good
Meaning
question.
half an hour defined by 30 times 60 seconds for anything.
That's a good
What
question.
would, are you going to say like what's their half? I mean, or what was their like?
That's
Why
a
would
good
they
question.
think in the first place to go?
Yes, why would you?
There is. I've got a case which is an opinion which is not ruled lahalocha. We don't rule like this view, but there is a view that looks at who always views when it comes to nidor, separating from a man separating from his wife who's had a period. Then there are some that maintain that it doesn't. That he has to separate for an entire day period. There's some that say it goes by 12-hour day, 12 60-minute hours. We don't follow that view. Let's try and think of something we do a view that we do follow that holds an hour, 60-minute hour.
I was told that the reason that Yekas hold 3 hours is they're really holding 6 30-minute hours.
Yeah, that's an excellent example. Before we continue with the Yekas, an excellent example, right? Waiting between meat and milk. Waiting between meat and milk, we wait 6 hours or 3 hours or 1 hour, depending where you're from in the world. And those are fixed hours. That's an excellent example. And you're mentioning that one of the views to explain why the Jews of German or English origin wait 3 hours is because 3 hours, at its very least, 6 hours, right? If we look at them as seasonal hours, the minimum they can ever be would be, well, it obviously depends where you're on the world, but it could come down to the possible 3 hours, and that's the source of the 3
Which
hours.
means that they're holding 6 seasonal
claims.
hours
Yeah.
of 30 minutes.
Right.
It only appears like 3 hours to
Right.
us. But they're actually holding 6 hours.
Right. Yeah. There's some that say
It
that.
differentiates so it's such a wide differentiation between. I mean, it will be a half an hour. You cut that hour in half.
You'd have to be very, very far north.
Where do they hold?
Really far north.
Yeah,
And
you'd have to be
more- I
very
mean,
far north. In the middle of the winter.
You want it to be right.
In the middle of the winter, it could happen. It's just a theory to explain that.
If you're in
It's just a
Timmins,
theory to explain the
Ontario,
view. It doesn't say. It's not written anywhere that that's the
Because
reason.
the whole milk between milk and meat also is not dependent on
Right.
sunrise or sunset.
Right,
It's a subject.
right. But then it's good enough to answer the question that was posed. We don't need the opposite. Not the answer you're giving there. The general principle, the regular principle of waiting between milk are regular 60-minute hours. Right?
Right.
This is maybe trying to draw it into seasonal hours, but definitely the simple way of looking at it is waiting between milk is regular 60-minute hours.
But the keeping 1 hour from between meat and milk is already mentioned in
Dutch.
German that lived in Central Europe and not.
Correct.
The Dutch do that.
Yeah, that's definitely not based on
So
seasonal hours.
it
That's not
doesn't
based.
seem.
No, that's definitely not based. The 1 hour is definitely not based on. No, the reason why we've gone completely off course here, but the reason why we suggest is because the 3 hours has got very little source to it. The 1 hour and 6 hour are very strongly based. The 3 hour, the custom of waiting 3 hours has got a very, very thin base in the Rishonim. It's based on a Rabbeinu Yerucham. Rabbeinu Yerucham lived in Spain in the 13th century. He was a Talmud of the Rosh, who's maybe more familiar to us. and he writes 3 hours. He's the only one who writes 3 hours, and there are claims that it's a printing mistake. There are, and the claims have good basis. So there's very little source to it, to this custom, to widespread custom, and therefore this is one of the suggestions to explain where it might come from.
It's almost like a compromise, like in a shidduch or something. And like, it sounds like a compromise. You hold one, you hold 6.
Me in the middle. Very good. Okay. Fine. So let's move on. So we've discussed now Mincha Dola. We've defined now the earliest time for davening the afternoon prayers. The earliest time is at a time called Mincha Gedola, which is the earliest time they could bring the afternoon sacrifice, which was half an hour after midday. We mentioned it's half a seasonal hour, though perhaps in the winter one should wait half a 60-minute hour, one should wait 30 minutes before davening Mincha. And this is the earliest time for Mincha, which is Mincha Gedola. The Shulchan Aruch does write that preferably one should daven later in the day, after time called Mincha Ketana, which we'll define shortly. Though it's very clear in all the poskim, in Mishavur and all other poskim, that if for whatever reason it's more convenient to daven, it's easier to find a minyan, whatever other reason, to daven at the Mincha Gedola, it's perfectly okay. Therefore, very few people are actually particular to daven later in the day. It's perfectly okay to daven from the time Mincha Gedola. I'll tell you an interesting story, which Rav Margalit, Rav of the city, he told an interesting story. When he first became Rav of the city, if I'm correct, I think he was only 24, I think, at the time. There was only 1 minyan in Carmiel. There was one shul with 1 minyan in Carmiel. That's why they took a 24-year-old at the Rav. There's only 1 minyan shul. Look what he's built. And there was one of even the minyan was barely a minyan. And there was one old man who was one of the more religious people at the minyan. And he came every day to Shachris. And he came every day to Mariv. The morning and night prayers, he was always there. But he never turned up for Mincha. He never turned up for afternoon prayers. And Rav Margalit was astonished. Why does he never come to Mincha? He's an old man. He's not at work. Why doesn't he come to Mincha? So one day he plucked up the courage. He's going to ask him. Went over to the man after Shachos, after Mariv. Started talking. He said, "I'm wondering. You're here every day for Shachos. You come for the morning prayers, for the night prayers. Why did you come for Mincha, for the afternoon prayers?" So the man said to him, "You daven just before sunset, just before Shkia. They do it so that they have Mincha and Mariv in close proximity, so that people won't only have to come once for both. You daven Mincha just before sunset." He said, "I've got no guarantees. How do I know I'm going to be around at sunset? How do I know I'm going to be around? I get the first opportunity, come Mincha Gedola, I daven. You're 24. So it's a very important message you taught us, to all of us, with no guarantees. No guarantees. Yeah. Okay.
It would be understandable there would be a reason to daven mincha early if when a mitzvah comes along just to grab it. So why should you daven later?
Right.
The mitzvah's already like chal on you.
Right. So why not? Because that was the earliest time for the Korban Talmud, but it wasn't usually brought at that time. Right? The Korban Talmud was usually brought at 9.5 hours. Again, 9.5 hours. We're talking about 9.5 hours into the day, right. Starting from sunrise, ending at sunset. There's a 12-hour day. Mincha Gedola we said is 6.5 hours, which is half an hour after midday. Right? 6 hours is midday. 6.5 is Mincha Gedola. The Korban Talmud was usually brought at 9.5 hours, which is what we call Mincha Ketana. And that's the reason why Rabbi Eliezer Stahl, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, lived in Tzfat, 16th century, he writes that it's preferable to daven Mincha Ketana.
It's better to daven Yachid earlier?
No. Definitely if you've got a minyan later, you wait for a minyan. If you've got a minyan earlier, you should daven with a minyan. The Chazon Ish would always daven in Mincha Gedola, because there's a different halacha about eating before davening. So even though eating a regular meal, we rule that one can eat before davening, he was machmir, that on the contrary, he didn't want to eat anything before davening mincha, and therefore he would daven mincha at the earliest possible opportunity, so they wouldn't eat before davening. So there are plenty of reasons why to daven earlier, and therefore one shouldn't really take this into account unless all things are completely equal, and it's perfectly okay to daven a mincha gedola. But let's talk about that.
That's around 3-ish, 4-ish.
So let's define when it is. Again, we said 9.5 hours into the day. So if we have, let's bring an example. Let's go back to our 6 till 6 day. In the middle of March or September, we may have a day that starts at 6 and ends at 6. So mincha gedola, the earliest time for mid-davening mincha we said was at 12:30. Mincha ketana, 9.5 hours a day is going to be at 3:30. That's again just an example of our day. It will obviously range depending on when sunrise and sunset is, how long the seasonal hours, depending on what time of year it is, and where one is, how far north or south one is from the equator. Okay, so we've defined now mincha gedola, 6.5 hours into the day. We defined mincha ketana as 9.5 hours into the day. Let's now define the third time which is connected to mincha. This time is referred to as plag ha-mincha. Plag ha-mincha. And this time plag ha-mincha is going to be, even though it's derived from mincha ketana, for us it's going to be possibly even more important than mincha ketana. Plag ha-mincha, plag means halfway. Plag is Aramaic for half. Halfway through mincha. This is halfway through the preferred time for mincha. The preferred time for mincha, we said, is from mincha ketana until shkia. From mincha ketana, the preferred time of the korban, when the afternoon sacrifice is brought, until sunset. That's the preferred time, we said, theoretically, for davening mincha. That gives us a 2.5 hour slot. Right? From 9.5 hours into the day, which is mincha ketana, until sunset, which is 12 hours, we have a total of 2.5 hours.
I thought plag is between Shkia to after Shkia.
No. So plag ha-mincha is halfway between mincha ketana and shkia. Halfway between 9.5 hours and 12 hours, which comes out, again we said it's a 2.5 hour. 2.5 hours will be 9.5 and 12. Split that into 1.25. If we add 1.25 to our 9.5, we get 10.75. 10.75 hours, which will put us 1.25 hours before sunset. 10.75 hours is defined as plag ha-mincha. Again, these hours are seasonal hours. They're not clock hours. They're in our example of 6 till 6. It will be a clock hour, but it will, in reality, be a seasonal hour.
So it will come out to be 4:45.
So in our example, it will come out to 4:45 as plag ha-mincha. Okay. When is plag ha-mincha relevant? Let's give bring some examples of halachas where it's relevant. Example number 1. Someone who wants to do what's called early Shabbos, right? Early Shabbos in places like Denmark and even in London is something which everyone does, because doing Shabbos at the regular time is 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, depending how far north you go, and therefore everyone, except for a number of individuals, will bring in what's called early Shabbos. Early Shabbos means you're bringing in Shabbos earlier than sunset. Shabbos starts at sunset. Early Shabbos means you're bringing in Shabbos before sunset. Sunset, far north of the equator in the middle of summer, maybe 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. It's too late definitely too late for the kids, and too late also for many adults. And therefore, they want to bring in Shabbos much earlier.
Yeah, but in Carmel in the summer. In Carmel, they're doing it in the summer.
Oh, right, yeah. In St. Carmel in the summer, again, in Eretz Israel, it's less necessary. But even in Eretz Israel, there are individuals who like doing it. You will find scattered minyanim. There's at least one in Carmel that bring in early Shabbos. Rav Zach says one as well. They bring early Shabbos. So when is the earliest time one can bring in Shabbos? Can you bring in Friday morning? Right? It's inconvenient for me, Shabbos, Friday night, Shabbos, inconvenient. Let's start Friday morning. When can you bring it in? Bring it before sunset, it's Friday. How can you bring in Shabbos when it's Friday? The earliest time you can bring in Shabbos is this time we defined as, which we call plag ha-mincha. Plag ha-mincha is the earliest time one can bring in Shabbos, which is 1.25 hours before sunset. Now if we mention sunset, let's say sunset is 9 o'clock. 1.25 hours is when?
It's going to be 7:45.
So it's not going to be 7:45.
Oh Oh, you said it was 9 o'clock.
Because it's why? Because it's seasonal hours.
Right.
It's seasonal hours. And these countries that have problems that sunset is at 9 o'clock, it's because sunrise is at 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning. So they're going to have very, very long seasonal hours. So their 1.25 hours is going to be much longer than that. Right? It will be much longer than that. But that's the earliest time they're going to bring the Shabbos. They'll work out where Plag HaMincha is. And that's the earliest time to light the Shabbos candles and the earliest time that they can daven Maariv.
Where's it derived from? Where's Plag? We understand where the afternoon is, or Chatzos. We understand where Shkia is. Where's Plag HaMincha derived from? What's it based on?
What's it based on? It's based on the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda maintains that that once you're that close to night, he maintains that it's the end of the afternoon. One can only daven the afternoon prayers until Plag HaMincha, and one can daven the evening prayers from Plag HaMincha onwards. Right?
How do we do both then?
Oh, how do we do both? Very good. How do we do both? Doing both is actually referred to by the poskim as a tarati desassi, two contradictory actions. One is following the majority opinion, the rabbis, and generally treating sunset as the mincha, afternoon prayers until sunset, and evening prayers from sunset onwards. Generally we behave like that. And all of a sudden when it comes to early Shabbos, one is davening mincha up until Plag HaMincha, and davening Maariv after Plag HaMincha, which is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who disagrees with the Chachomim, with the rabbis. So your question is, how can we do both? There are different opinions regarding this. Some maintain that you can't do both. You have to pick. Some maintain you can pick. You can choose your entire life to follow Rabbi Yehuda, or your entire life to follow the rabbis, but pick one and stick to it. Others maintain that as long as you don't do a contradictory ruling on any given day, it's okay. So on a particular day, if one was to daven mincha after Plag HaMincha, then he's following the rabbis, the chachomim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he should have done it before Plag HaMincha. So he can't now daven Maariv, because he'll be davening Maariv now. If he daven now before sunset, he'll be davening Maariv at the time that Rabbi Yehuda says one can daven, which is no good according to the rabbis. One has to wait until sunset. And that's definitely how one should try to act. Therefore, anyone who does early Shabbos should make sure to daven mincha before Plag HaMincha. Though you will find in many places where they have fixed minyanim, where actually they do have mincha and Maariv together between Plag and Shkia.
Is that why sometimes they say Shema after? Because they did it too early.
That's right. The Shema, yes.
That's what
They should.
And this is a problem when you have Rosh Chodesh on Shabbos, right?
There's also an issue of Tarati Desassi and Rosh on Shabbos. There's another example which is not connected. We'll end with this because we're nearing the end of the time. Another example of a Tarati Desassi, two contradictory actions, is an example of where you have Rosh Chodesh on Motzei Shabbos. Right? It's really not connected to the discussion, but it's another example of this Tarati Desassi of this, where we see two contradictory things. One ate Shalosh Shudas. One ate the third meal of Shabbos during the day, during Shabbos, and ended after night. And now he's benching. What does he do? If he says, we'd say, the addition that we add on Shabbos, because he started eating on Shabbos, which one would generally do on a regular Shabbos. Can he say Yalav Yovoi? Because Yalav Yovoi is for Motzei Shabbos.
Depends when he brings out Shabbos.
Sorry?
So it'll depend when he brings out Shabbos.
So he hasn't brought out Shabbos yet. He hasn't brought out Shabbos, but it's already Rosh Chodesh. It's already night.
He still says Yalav Yovoi.
You can extend Shabbos into the next day, right?
There's a difference of opinion what to say. There are some that say that he should say both. And they justify saying by saying that it's not two contradictory rulings, because Ritzei is before Yalav Yovoi. So when he says Ritzei Shabbos, and then as he ends Ritzei, he's now moving on to Rosh Chodesh. Then he says Yalav Yovoi. So he places the break between Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh between the two.
But that sounds like it's implying that as he says Yalav Yovoi, he's now officially
ending Shabbos and bringing Yalav Yovoi. Yeah.
But that's
Why
not
not?
really how it works until he says, I don't know. But he didn't
Why not?
necessarily say.
Yeah.
So he's saying that's an action that actually is done. He'd do malacha after that.
Perhaps.
Exactly, like-
Yeah.
He's
That's one
just-
opinion. Definitely the preferred course of action is to avoid it. Right? The preferred course of action is to avoid it. When it happens, the best thing to do is to finish eating, or at least finish eating the challah. At least not to eat any more challah after sunset, after shkia. And therefore, even if he benches later, even if he benches when it's Rosh Chodesh, since he didn't actually eat any bread after nightfall when it was Rosh Chodesh, therefore he certainly wouldn't say Yalav Yorah. He certainly only says Ritzay. That's definitely something one should try and do when it happens. Happens approximately once every half a year. It happens. One should try and avoid the situation and eat a little bit earlier to avoid this problem of what's called a tarati tasasri, two contradictory rulings.